Chapter 22 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 22. A mountain has suddenly sprung up in the garden of the Tuileries. Under a cloudless sky, Maximilien heads the procession of his colleagues in a blue coat and yellow breeches, carrying in his hand a bouquet of wheat-ears, cornflowers, and poppies. He ascends the mountain and proclaims the God of Jean-Jacques to the Republic, which hears and weeps. O purity! O sweetness! O faith! O antique simplicity! O tears of pity! O fertilizing dew! O clemency! O human fraternity! In vain, atheism still lifts its hideous face. Maximilien grasps a torch, flames devour the monster, and wisdom appears, with one hand pointing to the sky, in the other holding a crown of stars. On the platform raised against the façade of the Tuileries, Évariste, standing amid a throng of deeply stirred spectators, sheds tears of joy and renders thanks to God. An era of universal felicity opens before his eyes. He sighs. At last we shall be happy, pure, innocent, if the scoundrels suffer it. Alas, the scoundrels have not suffered it. There must be more executions, more torrents of tainted blood must be shed. 3 days after the festival celebrating the new alliance and the reconciliation of heaven and earth, the Convention promulgates the law of Prairial, which suppresses, with a sort of ferocious good nature, all the traditional forms of law, whatever has been devised since the time of the Roman jurisconsults, for the safeguarding of innocence under suspicion. No more sifting of evidence, no more questioning of the accused, no more witnesses, no more counsel for the defence. Love of the fatherland supplies everything that is needful. The prisoner, who bears locked up in his bosom his guilt or innocence, passes without a word aloud before the patriot jury, and it is in this brief moment they must unravel his case, often complicated and obscure. How is justice possible? How distinguish in an instant between the honest man and the villain, the patriot and the enemy of the fatherland? Disconcerted for the moment, Gamelin quickly learned his new duties and accommodated himself to his new functions. He recognized that this curtailment of formalities was genuinely characteristic of the new justice, at once salutary and terrifying, the administrators of which were no longer ermined pedants leisurely weighing the pros and contras of their Gothic balances, but good sans-culottes judging by inspiration and seeing the whole truth in a flash. When guarantees and precautions would have undone everything, the impulses of an upright heart saved the situation. We must follow the promptings of nature, the good mother who never deceives. The heart must teach us to do judgment, and Gamelin made invocation to the manes of Jean-Jacques. Man of virtue, inspire me with the love of men, the ardent desire to regenerate humankind. His colleagues for the most part felt with him. They were, first and foremost, simple people, and when the forms of law were simplified, they felt more comfortable. Justice thus abbreviated satisfied them. The pace was quickened, and no obstacles were left to fret them. They limited themselves to an inquiry into the opinions of the accused, not conceiving it possible that any one could think differently from themselves except in pure perversity. Believing themselves the exclusive possessors of truth, wisdom, and quintessence of good, they attributed to their opponents nothing but error and evil. They felt themselves all-powerful, they envisaged God. They saw God, these jurors of the Revolutionary Tribunal. The Supreme Being, acknowledged by Maximilien, flooded them with his flames of light. They loved, they believed. The chair of the accused had been replaced by a vast platform able to accommodate 50 persons. The court only dealt with batches now. The public prosecutor would often confound under the same charge or implicate as accomplices individuals who met each other for the first time before the tribunal. The latter, taking advantage of the terrible facilities accorded by the law of Prairial, sat in judgment on those supposed prison plots which, coming after the proscriptions of the Dantonists and the Commune, were made to seem their outcome by the insinuations of cunning adversaries. In fact, to let the world appreciate the two essential characteristics of a conspiracy fomented by foreign gold against the Republic, to wit, inopportune moderation on the one hand, and self-interested excess of zeal on the other, they had united in the same condemnation two very different women, the widow of Camille Desmoulins, poor lovable Lucile, and the widow of Hébertiste Moreau, goddess of a day and jolly companion all her life. Both, to make the analogy complete, had been shut up in the same prison, where they had mingled their tears on the same bench. Both, to round off the resemblance, had climbed the scaffold. Too ingenious a symbol, a masterpiece of equilibrium, conceived doubtless by a lawyer's brain, and the honour of which was given to Maximilian. This representative of the people was accredited with every eventuality, happy or unhappy, that came about in the Republic, every change that was effected in the laws, in manners and morals, the very course of the seasons, the harvest, the incidents of epidemics. Unjust, of course, but not unmerited the injustice, for indeed the man, the little, spruce, cat-faced dandy, was all-powerful with the people. That day the tribunal was clearing off a batch of prisoners involved in the great plot, 30 or more conspirators from the Luxembourg, submissive enough in gaol, but royalists or federalists of the most pronounced type. The prosecution relied almost entirely on the evidence of a single informer. The jurors did not know one word of the matter, not so much as the conspirators' names. Gamelin, casting his eye over the prisoners' bench, recognised Fortuné Chassagne among the accused. Julie's lover, pale-faced and emaciated by long confinement, and his features showing coarser in the glare of the light that flooded the hall, still retained traces of his old grace and proud bearing. His eyes met Gamelin's and filled with scorn. Gamelin, possessed by a calm fury, rose, asked leave to speak, and, fixing his eyes on the bust of Roman Brutus, which looked down on the tribunal, "Citoyen Président," he said, "although there may exist between one of the accused and myself ties which, if they were made public, would be ties of married kinship, I hereby declare I do not decline to act. The two Bruti did not decline their duty, when, for the salvation of the State and the cause of freedom, the one had to condemn a son, the other to strike down an adoptive father." He resumed his seat. "A fine scoundrel that," muttered Chassagne between his teeth. The public remained cold, whether because it was tired of high-flown characters, or thinking that Gamelin had triumphed too easily over his feelings of family affection. "Citoyen Gamelin," said the President, "by the terms of the law, every refusal must be formulated in writing within the 24 hours preceding the opening of the trial. In any case, you have no reason to refuse. A patriot jury is superior to human passions." Each prisoner was questioned for 3 or 4 minutes, the examination resulting in a verdict of death in every instance. The jurors voted without a word said, by a nod of the head or by exclamation. When Gamelin's turn came to pronounce his opinion, "All the accused," he declared, "are convicted, and the law is explicit." As he was descending the stairway of the Palais de Justice, a young man dressed in a bottle-green box-coat, and who looked 17 or 18 years of age, stopped him abruptly as he went by. The lad wore a round hat, tilted on the back of his head, the brim framing his fine pale face in a dark aureole. Facing the juror, in a terrible voice vibrating with passion and despair, "Villain! Monster! Murderer!" he screamed. "Strike me, coward! I am a woman. Have me arrested. Have me guillotined. Cain! I am your sister!" And Julie spat in his face. The throng of tricoteurs and sans-culottes was relaxing by this time in its revolutionary vigilance. Its civic zeal had largely cooled. Gamelin and his assailant found themselves in the centre of nothing worse than uproar and confusion. Julie fought a way through the press and disappeared in the dark. End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Winifred Jackson. Chapter 23. Évariste Gamelin was worn out and could not rest. 20 times in the night he would awake with a start from a sleep haunted by nightmares. It was only in the blue chamber, in Élodie's arms, that he could snatch a few hours' slumber. He talked and cried out in his sleep, and used often to awaken her. But she could make nothing of what he said. One morning, after a night when he had seen the Eumenides, he started awake, broken with terror and weak as a child. The dawn was piercing the window curtains with its wan arrows. Évariste's hair, lying tangled on his brow, covered his eyes with a black veil. Élodie, by the bedside, was gently parting the wild locks. She was looking at him now, with a sister's tenderness. With her handkerchief she wiped away the icy sweat from the unhappy man's forehead. Then he remembered that fine scene in the Orestes of Euripides, which he had essayed to represent in a picture that, if he could have finished it, would have been his masterpiece. The scene where the unhappy Electra wipes away the spume that sullies her brother's lips. And he seemed to hear Élodie also say in a gentle voice, "Hear me, beloved brother, while the Furies leave you master of your reason." And he thought, "And yet I am no parricide. Far from it. It is filial piety that made me shed the tainted blood of the enemies of my fatherland." End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 24. There seemed no end to these trials for conspiracy in the prisons. 49 accused crowded the tiers of seats. Maurice Brotteaux occupied the right-hand corner of the topmost row, the place of honour. He was dressed in his plum-coloured surtout, which he had brushed very carefully the day before, and mended at the pocket where his little Lucretius had ended by fretting a hole. Beside him sat the woman Rochemaure, painted and powdered and patched, a brilliant and ghastly figure. They had put the Père Longuemare between her and the girl Athénaïs, who had recovered her look of youthful freshness at the Madelonettes. On the platform the gendarmes massed a number of other prisoners unknown to any of our friends, and who, as likely as not, knew nothing of each other, yet accomplices one and all, lawyers, journalists, ci-devant nobles, citizens and citizens' wives. The citoyenne Rochemaure caught sight of Gamelin on the jurors' bench. He had not answered her urgent letters and repeated messages. Still she had not abandoned hope, and threw him a look of supplication, trying to appear fascinating and pathetic for him. But the young juror's cold glance robbed her of any illusion she might have entertained. The clerk read the act of accusation, which, succinct as was its reference to each individual, was a lengthy document because of the great number accused. It began by exposing in general outline the plot concocted in the prisons to drown the Republic in the blood of the representatives of the nation and the people of Paris. Then, coming to each severally, it went on: "One of the most mischievous authors of this abominable conspiracy is the man Brotteaux, once known as des Ilettes, receiver of imposts under the tyrant. This person, who was remarkable, even in the days of tyranny, for his libertine behaviour, is a sure proof how dissoluteness and immorality are the greatest enemies of the liberty and happiness of peoples. As a fact, after misappropriating the public revenues and wasting in debauchery a noticeable part of the people's patrimony, the person in question connived with his former concubine, the woman Rochemaure, to enter into correspondence with the émigrés, and traitorously keep the faction of the foreigner informed of the state of our finances, the movements of our troops, the fluctuations of public opinion. Brotteaux, who, at this period of his despicable life, was living in concubinage with a prostitute he had picked up in the mud of the Rue Fromenteau, the girl Athénaïs, easily suborned her to his purposes, and made use of her to foment the counter–revolution by impudent and unpatriotic cries and indecent and traitorous speeches. Sundry remarks of this ill–omened individual will afford you a clear indication of his abject views and pernicious purpose. Speaking of the patriotic tribunal now called upon to punish him, he declared insultingly, "The Revolutionary Tribunal is like a play of William Shakespeare, who mixes up with the most bloodthirsty scenes the most trivial buffooneries." Then he was for ever preaching atheism as the surest means of degrading the people and driving it into immorality. In the prison of the Conciergerie, where he was confined, he used to deplore as among the worst of calamities the victories of our valiant armies, and tried to throw suspicion on the most patriotic generals, crediting them with designs of tyrannicide. "Only wait," he would say in atrocious language which the pen is loath to reproduce, "only wait till, some day, one of these warriors, to whom you owe your salvation, swallows you up as a stork in the fable gobbled up the frogs." The woman Rochemaure, a ci-devant noble, concubine of Brotteaux, is not less culpable than he. Not only was she in correspondence with the foreigner and in the pay of Pitt himself, but in complicity with swindlers, such as Julien of Toulouse and Chabot, associates of the ci-devant Baron de Batz. She seconded that reprobate in all sorts of cunning machinations to depreciate the shares of the Company of the Indies, buy them in at a cheap price, and then raise the quotation by artifices of an opposite tendency, to the confusion and ruin of private fortunes and of the public funds. Incarcerated at La Bourbe and the Madelonette, she never ceased in prison to conspire, to dabble in stocks and shares, and to devote herself to attempts at corruption, to suborn judges and jury. Louis Longuemare, ex–noble, ex–capuchin, had long been practised in infamy and crime before committing the acts of treason for which he has to answer here. Living in a shameful promiscuity with the girl Gocu, known as Athénaïs, under Brotteaux's very roof, he is the accomplice of the said girl and the said ci-devant nobleman. During his imprisonment at the Conciergerie, he has never ceased for one single day writing pamphlets aimed at the subversion of public liberty and security. It is right to say, with regard to Marthe Gocu, known as Athénaïs, that prostitutes are the greatest scourge of public morality, which they insult, and the opprobrium of the society which they disgrace. But why speak at length of revolting crimes which the accused confesses shamelessly? The accusation then proceeded to pass in review the 54 other prisoners, none of whom either Brotteaux or Père Longuemare or the citoyenne Rochemaure were acquainted with, except for having seen several of them in the prisons, but who were one and all included with the first named in this odious plot, with which the annals of the nation can furnish nothing to compare. The piece concluded by demanding the penalty of death for all the culprits. Brotteaux was the first to be examined. "You were in the plot?" No, I have been in no plots. Every word is untrue in the act of accusation I have just heard read. There, you see, you are plotting still at this moment to discredit the Tribunal." And the President went on to the woman Rochemaure, who answered with despairing protestations of innocence, tears, and quibblings. The Père Longuemare referred himself purely and entirely to God's will. He had not even brought his written defence with him. All the questions put to him he answered in a spirit of resignation. Only, when the President spoke of him as a Capuchin, did the old Adam wake again in him. "I am not a Capuchin," he said. "I am a priest and a monk of the order of the Barnabites." "It is the same thing," returned the President good-naturedly. The Père Longuemare looked at him indignantly. "One cannot conceive a more extraordinary error," he cried, "than to confound with a Capuchin a monk of this order of the Barnabites, which derives its constitutions from the Apostle Paul himself." The remark was greeted with a burst of laughter and hooting from the spectators, at which Père Longuemare, taking this derision to betoken a denial of his proposition, announced that he would die a member of this order of St. Barnabas, the habit of which he wore in his heart. "Do you admit," asked the President, "entering into plots with the girl Gorcut, known as Athénaïs, the same who accorded you her despicable favours?" At the question, the Père Longuemare raised his eyes sorrowfully to heaven, but made no answer. His silence expressed the surprise of an unsophisticated mind, and the gravity of a man of religion who fears to utter empty words. "You, the girl Gorcut," the President asked, turning to Athénaïs, "do you admit plotting in conjunction with Brotteaux?" Her answer was softly spoken. "Monsieur Brotteaux, to my knowledge, has done nothing but good. He is a man of the sort we should have more of. There is no better sort. Those who say the contrary are mistaken. That is all I have to say." The President asked her if she admitted having lived in concubinage with Brotteaux. The expression had to be explained to her, as she did not understand it. But directly she gathered what the question meant, she answered that would only have depended on him, but he had never asked her. There was a laugh in the public galleries, and the President threatened the girl Gorcut to refuse her a hearing if she answered in such a cynical sort again. At this she broke out, calling him sneak, sour-face, cuckold, and spewing out over him, judges, and jury a torrent of invective, till the gendarmes dragged her from the bench and hustled her out of the hall. The President then proceeded to a brief examination of the rest of the accused, taking them in the order in which they sat on the tiers of benches. One, a man named Navet, pleaded that he could not have plotted in prison, where he had only spent 4 days. The President observed that the point deserved to be considered, and begged the citoyens of the jury to make a note of it. A certain Bellier said the same thing, and the President made the same remark to the jury in his favour. This mildness on the judge's part was interpreted by some as the result of a praiseworthy scrupulosity, by others as payment due in recognition of their talents as informers. The deputy of the public prosecutor spoke next. All he did was to amplify the details of the act of accusation, and then to put the question: "Is it proven that Maurice Brotteaux, Louise Rochemaure, Louis Longuemare, Marthe Gorcut, known as Athénaïs, Eusèbe Rocher, Pierre Guiton Fabulet, Marceline Descourtis, etc., etc., are guilty of forming a conspiracy, the means whereof are assassination, starvation, the making of forged assignats and false coin, the depravation of morals and public spirit, the aim and object, civil war, the abolition of the national representation, the establishment of royalty?" The jurors withdrew into the chamber of deliberation. They voted unanimously in the affirmative, only excepting the cases of the aforenamed Navet and Bellier, whom the President, and following his lead, the public prosecutor, had put, as it were, in a separate class by themselves. Gamelin stated the motives for his decision thus: "The guilt of the accused is self-evident. The safety of the nation demands their chastisement, and they ought themselves to desire their punishment as the only means of expiating their crimes. The President pronounced sentence in the absence of those it concerned. In these great days, contrary to what the law prescribed, the condemned were not called back again to hear their judgment read, no doubt for fear of the effects of despair on so large a number of prisoners. A needless apprehension, so extraordinary and so general was the submissiveness of the victims in those days. The clerk of the court came down to the cells to read the verdict, which was listened to with such silence and impassivity as made it a common comparison to liken the condemned of Prairial to trees marked down for felling. The citoyenne Rochemaure declared herself pregnant. A surgeon, who was likewise one of the jury, was directed to see her. She was carried out, fainting, to her dungeon. "Ah!" sighed Père Longuemare, "these judges and jurors are men very deserving of pity. Their state of mind is truly deplorable. They mix up everything, and confound a Barnabite with a Franciscan." The execution was to take place the same day at the Barrière du Trône Renversé. The condemned, their toilet completed, hair cropped, and shirt cut down at the neck, waited for the headsman, packed like cattle in the small room separated off from the gaoler's office by a glazed partition. When presently the executioner and his men arrived, Brotteaux, who was quietly reading his Lucretius, put the marker at the page he had begun, shut the book, stuffed it in the pocket of his coat, and said to the Barnabite, "What enrages me, reverend father, is that I shall never convince you. We are both of us to sleep our last sleep, and I shall not be able to twitch you by the sleeve and tell you, 'There, you see, you have neither sensation nor consciousness left, you are inanimate. What comes after life is like what goes before.'" He tried to smile, but an atrocious spasm of pain wrung his heart and vitals, and he came near fainting. He resumed, however, "Father, I let you see my weakness. I love life, and I do not leave it without regret." "Sir," replied the monk gently, "take heed. You are a braver man than I, and nevertheless death troubles you more. What does that mean, if not that I see the light which you do not see yet?" "Might it not also be," said Brotteaux, "that I regret life because I have enjoyed it better than you, who have made it as close a copy of death as possible?" "Sir," said the Père Longuemare, his face paling, "this is a solemn moment. God help me! It is plain we shall die without spiritual aid. It must be that in other days I have received the sacraments lukewarmly and with a thankless heart, for Heaven to refuse me them to–day, when I have such pressing need of them." The carts were waiting. The condemned were loaded into them pell–mell with hands tied. The woman Rochemaure, whose pregnancy had not been verified by the surgeon, was hoisted into one of the tumbrils. She recovered a little of her old energy to watch the crowd of onlookers, hoping against hope to find rescuers amongst them. The throng was less dense than formerly, and the excitement less extreme. Only a few women screamed, "Death! Death!" or mocked those who were to die. The men mostly shrugged their shoulders, looked another way, and said nothing, whether out of prudence or from respect of the laws. A shudder went through the crowd when Athénaïs emerged from the wicket. She looked a mere child. She bowed her head before the monk. "Monsieur le curé," she asked him, "give me the absolution." The Père Longuemare gravely recited the sacramental words in muttered tones, then, "My daughter," he added, "you have fallen into great disorders of living, but can I offer the Lord a heart as simple as yours? Would I were sure!" She climbed lightly into the cart, and there, throwing out her bosom, and proudly lifting her girlish head, she cried, "Vive le roi!" She made a little sign to Brotteaux to show him there was a vacant space beside her. Brotteaux helped the Barnabite to get in, and came and placed himself between the monk and the simple–hearted girl. "Sir," said the Père Longuemare to the Epicurean philosopher, "I ask you a favour. This God in whom you do not yet believe, pray to him for me. It is far from sure you are not nearer to him than I am myself. A moment can decide this. A second, and you may be called by the Lord to be his highly favoured son. Sir, pray for me." While the wheels were grinding over the pavements of the long Faubourg Antoine, the monk was busy, with heart and lips, reciting the prayers of the dying. Brotteaux's mind was fixed on recalling the lines of the poet of nature, "Sic ubi non erimus." Bound as he was, and shaken in the vile jolting cart, he preserved his calm, and even showed a certain solicitude to maintain an easy posture. At his side, Athénaïs, proud to die like the Queen of France, surveyed the crowd with haughty looks, and the old financier, noting as a connoisseur the girl's white bosom, was filled with regret for the light of day. End of chapter 24.
Chapter 25 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Schmit. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 25. While the carts, escorted by gendarmes, were rumbling along on their way to the Place du Trône Renversé, carrying to their death Brotteaux and his accomplices, Évariste sat pensive on a bench in the garden of the Tuileries. He was waiting for Élodie. The sun, nearing its setting, shot its fiery darts through the leafy chestnuts. At the gate of the garden, Fame on her winged horse blew her everlasting trumpet. The newspaper hawkers were bawling the news of the great victory of Fleurus. Yes, thought Gamelin, victory is ours. We have paid full price for it. He could see the beaten generals, disconsolate shades, trailing in the blood-stained dust of yonder Place de la Révolution, where they perished. And he smiled proudly, reflecting that, but for the severities in which he had borne his share, the Austrian horses would today be gnawing the bark of the trees beside him. He soliloquized. Life-giving terror, oh blessed terror! Last year at this time, our heroic defenders were beaten and in rags. The soil of the fatherland was invaded, 2/3 of the departments in revolt. Now our armies, well equipped, well trained, commanded by able generals, are taking the offensive, ready to bear liberty through the world. Peace reigns over all the territory of the Republic. Life-giving terror, oh blessed terror, oh saintly guillotine! Last year at this time the Republic was torn with factions, the hydra of federalism threatened to devour her. Now a united Jacobinism spreads over the empire its might and its wisdom. Nevertheless, he was gloomy. His brow was deeply lined, his mouth bitter. His thoughts ran, "We used to say, to conquer or to die. We were wrong. It is to conquer and to die, we ought to say." He looked about him. Children were building sandcastles. Citoyennes in their wooden chairs under the trees were sewing or embroidering. The passers-by, in coat and breeches of elegant cut and strange fashion, their thoughts fixed on their business or their pleasures, were making for home, and Gamelin felt himself alone amongst them. He was no compatriot, no contemporary of theirs. What was it had happened? How came the enthusiasm of the great years to have been succeeded by indifference, weariness, perhaps disgust? It was plain to see these people never wanted to hear the Revolutionary Tribunal spoken of again, and averted their eyes from the guillotine. Grown too painful a sight in the Place de la Révolution, it had been banished to the extremity of the Faubourg Antoine. There even, the passage of the tumbrils was greeted with murmurs. Voices, it was said, had been heard to shout, "Enough! Enough! When there were still traitors, conspirators. Enough when the committees must be reformed, the convention purged. Enough when scoundrels disgraced the national representation. Enough when they were planning the downfall of the just. For, dreadful thought, but only too true, Fouquier himself was weaving plots, and it was to ruin Maximilien that he had sacrificed with solemn ceremony 57 victims haled to death in the red sheet of parricides. France was giving way to pity, and pity was a crime. Then we should have saved her in spite of herself, and when she cried for mercy, stopped our ears and struck. Alas, the fates had decided otherwise. The fatherland was for cursing its saviors. Well, let it curse, if only it may be saved. It is not enough to immolate obscure victims, aristocrats, financiers, publicists, poets, a Lavoisier, a Roucher, an André Chénier. We must strike these all-puissant malefactors who, with hands full of gold and dripping with blood, are plotting the ruin of the mountain. The Fouchés, Tallien, Rovère, Carrier, Bourdon. We must deliver the state from all its enemies. If Hébert had triumphed, the convention was overthrown, the republic hastening to the abyss. If Desmoulins and Danton had triumphed, the convention had lost its virtue, ready to surrender the republic to the aristocrats, the money jobbers and the generals. If men like Tallien and Fouché, monsters gorged with blood and rapine, triumph, France is overwhelmed in a welter of crime and infamy. Robespierre, awake! When criminals, drunken with fury and affright, plan your death and the death of freedom. Couthon, Saint-Just, make haste. Why tarry ye to denounce the plots? Why? The old-time state, the royal monster, assured its empire by imprisoning every year 400,000 persons, by hanging 15,000, by breaking 3,000 on the wheel, and the republic still hesitates to sacrifice a few hundred heads for its security and domination? Let us drown in blood and save the fatherland. He was buried in these thoughts when Élodie hurried up to him, pale-faced and distraught. Évariste, what have you to say to me? Why not come to the Amour Peintre, to the Blue Chamber? Why have you made me come here? To bid you an eternal farewell. He had lost his wits. She faltered. She could not understand. He stopped her with a very slight movement of the hand. Élodie, I cannot any more accept your love. She begged him to walk on further. People could see them, overhear them where they were. He moved on a score of yards and resumed very quietly. I have made sacrifices to my country, of my life and my honor. I shall die infamous. I shall have naught to leave you, unhappy girl, save an execrated memory. We love? Can anyone love me still? Can I love? She told him he was mad, that she loved him, that she would always love him. She was ardent, sincere, but she felt as well as he, she felt better than he, that he was right, but she fought against the evidence of her senses. He went on. I blame myself for nothing. What I have done, I would do again. I have made myself anathema for my country's sake. I'm accursed. I have put myself outside humanity. I shall never re-enter its pale. No, the great task is not finished. Oh, clemency, forgiveness! Do the traitors forgive? Are the conspirators clement? Scoundrels, parricides, multiply unceasingly. They spring up from underground, they swarm in from all our frontiers. Young men, who would have done better to perish with our armies, old men, children, women, with every mark of innocence, purity, and grace. They are offered up a sacrifice, and more victims are ready for the knife. You can see, Élodie, I must needs renounce love, renounce all joy, all sweetness of life, renounce life itself. He fell silent. Born to taste tranquil joys, Élodie, not for the first time, was appalled to find, under the tragic kisses of a lover like Évariste, her voluptuous transports blended with images of horror and bloodshed. She offered no reply, To Évariste, the girl's silence was as a draught of a bitter chalice. Yes, you can see, Élodie, we are on a precipice. Our deeds devour us. Our days, our hours are years. I shall soon have lived a century. Look at this brow. Is it a lover's? Love. Évariste, you are mine. I will not let you go. I will not give you back your freedom. She was speaking in the language of sacrifice. He felt it. She felt it herself. Will you be able, Élodie, one day to bear witness that I lived faithful to my duty, that my heart was upright and my soul unsullied, that I knew no passion but the public good, that I was born to feel and love? Will you say, he did his duty? But no, you will not say it, and I do not ask you to say it. Perish my memory. My glory is in my own heart. Shame beleaguers me about. If you love me, never speak my name. Eternal silence is best. A child of 8 or 9, trundling its hoop, ran just then between Gamelin's legs. He lifted the boy suddenly in his arms. Oh, child, you will grow up free, happy, and you will owe it to the infamous Gamelin. I am ferocious, that you may be happy. I'm cruel, that you may be kind. I am pitiless, that tomorrow all Frenchmen may embrace with tears of joy. He pressed the child to his breast. Little one, when you are a man, you will owe your happiness, your innocence to me, and if ever you hear my name uttered, you will execrate it. Then he put down the child, which ran away in terror to cling to its mother's skirts, who had hurried up to the rescue. The young mother, who was pretty and charming in her aristocratic grace, with her gown of white lawn, carried off the boy with a haughty look. Gamelin turned his eyes on Élodie. I have held the child in my arms. Perhaps I shall send the mother to the guillotine. And he walked away with long strides under the ordered trees. Élodie stood a moment motionless, her eyes fixed on the ground. Then, suddenly, she darted after her lover, and frenzied, dishevelled, like a Maenad, she gripped him as if to tear him in pieces, and cried in a voice choked with blood and tears, "Well then, me too, my beloved, send me to the guillotine. Me too, lay me under the knife." And at the thought of the knife at her neck, all her flesh melted in an ecstasy of horror and voluptuous transport. End of chapter 25.
Chapter 26 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 26. The sun of Thermidor was setting in a blood-red sky, while Évariste wandered, gloomy and careworn, in the Marbeuf Gardens, now a national park, frequented by the Parisian idlers. There were stalls for the sale of lemonade and ices. Wooden horses and shooting galleries were provided for the younger patriots. Under a tree, a little Savoyard in rags, with a black cap on his head, was making a marmot dance to the shrill notes of his hurdy-gurdy. A man, still young, slim-waisted, wearing a blue coat and his hair powdered, with a big dog at his heels, stopped to listen to the rustic music. Évariste recognized Robespierre. He found him paler, thinner, his face harder and drawn in folds of suffering. He thought to himself, "What fatigues! How many griefs have left their imprint on his brow! How grievous a thing it is to work for the happiness of mankind! What are his thoughts at this moment? Does the sound of this mountain music perhaps distract him from the cares of government? Is he thinking that he has made a pact with death, and that the hour of reckoning is coming close? Is he dreaming of a triumphant return to the Committee of Public Safety, from which he withdrew, weary of being held in check, with Couthon and Saint-Just, by a seditious majority? Behind that impenetrable countenance, what hopes are seething, or what fears? But Maximilian smiled at the lad, in a gentle, kind voice asked him several questions about his native valley, the humble home and parents the poor child had left behind, tossed him a small piece of silver, and resumed his stroll. After taking a few steps, he turned round again to call his dog, sniffing at the marmot. It was showing its teeth at the little creature that bristled up in defiance. "To heel, Brunt!" he called, "to heel!" And he plunged among the dark trees. Gamelin, out of respect, did not interrupt his lonely walk, but, as he gazed after the slender form disappearing in the darkness, he mentally addressed his hero in these impassioned words: "I have seen thy sadness, Maximilian. I have understood thy thought, thy melancholy, thy fatigue, even the look of fear that stamps thy face. Everything says, let the reign of terror end, and that of fraternity begin. Frenchmen, be united, be virtuous, be good and kind, love ye one another. Well then, I will second your designs, that you in your wisdom and goodness may be able to put an end to our civil discord, to our fratricidal hatred, turn the headsman into a gardener who will henceforth cut off only the heads of cabbages and lettuces. I will pave the way with my colleagues of the tribunal that must lead to clemency by exterminating conspirators and traitors. We will redouble our vigilance and our severity. No culprit shall escape us. And when the head of the last enemy of the Republic shall have fallen under the knife, then it will be given thee to be merciful without committing a crime. Then thou canst inaugurate the reign of innocence and virtue in all the land, O father of thy country." The incorruptible was already almost out of sight. Two men in round hats and nankeen breeches, one of whom, a tall lean man of a wild unkempt aspect, had a blur on one eye and resembled Talin, met him at the corner of an avenue, looked at him askance, and passed on, pretending not to recognize him. When they had gone far enough to be out of hearing, they muttered under their breath, "So there he goes, the king, the pope, the god, for he is God, and Catherine Theo is his prophetess. Dictator, traitor, tyrant, the race of Brutus is not extinct. Tremble, malefactor, the Tarpeian rock is near the capital." The dog Brunt ran toward the pair. They said no more and quickened their pace. End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 27. Robespierre, awake! The hour is come. Time presses. Soon it will be too late. At last, on the 8th Thermidor, in the Convention, the incorruptible rises. He is going to speak. Son of the 31st May, is this to be a second day spring? Gamelin waits and hopes. His mind is made up, then. Robespierre is to drag from the benches. They dishonour, these legislators, more guilty than the Federalists, more dangerous than Danton. No, not yet. I cannot, he says, resolve to clear away entirely the veil that hides this mystery of iniquity. It is mere summer lightning that flashes harmlessly and without striking any one of the conspirators, terrifies all. 60 of them at least for a fortnight had not dared sleep in their beds. Marat's way was to denounce traitors by their name, to point the finger of accusation at conspirators. The incorruptible hesitates, and from that moment he is the accused. That evening at the Jacobins the hall is filled to suffocation, the corridors, the courtyard are crowded. They are all there, loud-voiced friends and silent enemies. Robespierre reads them the speech the Convention had heard in affrighted silence, and the Jacobins greet it with excited applause. "It is my dying testament," declares the orator. You will see me drain the hemlock undismayed." "I will drink it with you," answered David. "All, we all will," shout the Jacobins, and separate without deciding anything. Évariste, while the death of the just was preparing, slept the sleep of the disciples in the garden of Gethsemane. Next day he attended the tribunal where 2 sections were sitting. That on which he served was trying 21 persons implicated in the conspiracy of the Lazare prison. The case was still proceeding when the tidings arrived. The Convention, after a 6-hour session, has decreed Maximilien Robespierre accused, with him Couthon and Saint-Just. Add Augustin Robespierre and Lebas, who have demanded to share the lot of the accused. The 5 outlaws stand at the bar of the House. News is brought that the president of the section sitting in the next court, the citoyen Dumas, has been arrested on the bench, but that the case goes on. Drums can be heard beating the alarm, and the tocsin peals from the churches. Évariste is still in his place when he is handed an order from the Commune to proceed to the Hôtel de Ville to sit in the General Council. To the sound of the rolling drums and clanging church bells, he and his colleagues record their verdict. Then he hurries home to embrace his mother and snatch up his scarf of office. The Place de Thionville is deserted. The section is afraid to declare either for or against the Convention. Wayfarers creep along under the walls, slip down side streets, sneak indoors. The call of the tocsin and alarm drums is answered by the noise of barring shutters and bolting doors. The citoyen Dupont senior has secreted himself in his shop. Remacle the porter is barricaded in his lodge. Little Josephine holds Mouton tremblingly in her arms. The widow Gamelin bemoans the dearness of victuals, cause of all the trouble. At the foot of the stairs Évariste encounters Élodie. She is panting for breath, and her black locks are plastered on her hot cheek. "I have been to look for you at the tribunal, but you had just left. Where are you going?" "To the Hôtel de Ville." "Don't go there, it would be your ruin. Henrion is arrested, the sections will not stir. The Section de Pique, Robespierre's section, will do nothing, I know it for a fact. My father belongs to it. If you go to the Hôtel de Ville, you are throwing away your life for nothing." "You wish me to be a coward?" "No, the brave thing is to be faithful to the Convention and to obey the law." "The law is dead when malefactors triumph." "Évariste, hear me. Hear your Élodie, hear your sister. Come and sit beside her, and let her soothe your angry spirit." He looked at her. Never had she seemed so desirable in his eyes. Never had her voice sounded so seductive, so persuasive in his ears. "A couple of paces, only a couple of paces, dear Évariste." And she drew him towards the raised platform on which stood the pedestal of the overthrown statue. It was surrounded by benches occupied by strollers of both sexes. A dealer in fancy articles was offering his laces. A seller of cooling drinks, his portable cistern on his back, was tinkling his bell. Little girls were showing off their airs and graces. The parapet was lined with anglers, standing, rod in hand, very still. The weather was stormy, the sky overcast. Gamelin leant on the low wall and looked down on the islet below, pointed like the prow of a ship, listening to the wind whistling in the tree-tops, and feeling his soul penetrated with an infinite longing for peace and solitude. Like a sweet echo of his thoughts, Élodie's voice sighed in his ear. "Do you remember, Évariste, how, at the sight of the green fields, you wanted to be a country justice in a village? Yes, that would be happiness." But above the rustling of the trees and the girl's voice, he could hear the tocsin and alarm drums, the distant tramp of horses, and rumbling of cannon along the streets. 2 steps from them, a young man, who was talking to an elegantly attired citoyenne, remarked: "Have you heard the latest? The opera is installed in the Rue de la Loi." Meantime the news was spreading. Robespierre's name was spoken, but in a shuddering whisper, for men feared him still. Women, when they heard the muttered rumour of his fall, concealed a smile. Évariste Gamelin seized Élodie's hand, but dropped it again swiftly next moment. "Farewell. I have involved you in my hideous fortunes. I have blasted your life for ever. Farewell. I pray you may forget me." "Whatever you do," she warned him, "do not go back home tonight. Come to the Amour peintre. Do not ring. Throw a pebble at my shutters. I will come and open the door to you myself. I will hide you in the loft. You shall see me return triumphant, or you shall never see me more. Farewell." On nearing the Hôtel de Ville, he caught the well-remembered roar of the old great days rising to the grey heavens. In the Place de Grève, a clash of arms, the glitter of scarfs and uniforms, Henriot's cannon drawn up. He mounts the grand stairs and, entering the council hall, signs the attendance book. The Council General of the Commune, by the unanimous voice of the 491 members present, declares for the outlawed patriots. The mayor sends for the table of the rights of man, reads the clause which runs, "When the government violates the rights of the people, insurrection is for the people the most sacred and the most indispensable of duties," and the first magistrate of Paris announces that the Commune's answer to the Convention's act of violence is to raise the populace in insurrection. The members of the Council General take oath to die at their posts. 2 municipal officers are deputed to go out on the Place de Grève and invite the people to join with their magistrates in saving the fatherland and freedom. There is an endless looking for friends, exchanging news, giving advice. Among these magistrates, artisans are the exception. The Commune assembled here is such as the Jacobin purge has made it: judges and jurors of the Revolutionary Tribunal, artists like Beauvalet and Gamelin, householders living on their means, and college professors, cosy citizens, well-to-do tradesmen, powdered heads, fat paunches, and gold watch-chains, very few sabots, striped trousers, carmagnole smocks, and red caps. These bourgeois councillors are numerous and determined, but, when all is said, they are pretty well all Paris possesses of true republicans. They stand on guard in the city mansion-house as on a rock of liberty, but an ocean of indifference washes round their refuge. However, good news arrives. All the prisons where the proscribed had been confined open their doors and disgorge their prey. Augustin Robespierre, coming from La Force, is the first to enter the Hôtel de Ville, and is welcomed with acclamation. At 8 o'clock it is announced that Maximilien, after a protracted resistance, is on his way to the Commune. He is eagerly expected. He is coming. He is here. A roar of triumph shakes the vault of the old municipal palace. He enters, supported by 20 arms. It is he, the little man there, slim, spruce, in blue coat and yellow breeches. He takes his seat. He speaks. At his arrival the Council orders the façade of the Hôtel de Ville to be illuminated there and then. It is there the Republic resides. He speaks in a thin voice, in picked phrases. He speaks lucidly, copiously. His hearers, who have staked their lives on his head, see the naked truth, see it to their horror. He is a man of words, a man of committees, a windbag, incapable of prompt action, incompetent to lead a revolution. They draw him into the hall of deliberation. Now they are all there, these illustrious outlaws: Lebas, Saint-Just, Couthon. Robespierre has the word. It is midnight and past, and he is still speaking. Meantime, Gamelin in the council hall, his bent brow pressed against the window, looks out with a haggard eye and sees the lamps flare and smoke in the gloom. Henriot's cannon are parked before the Hôtel de Ville. In the black Place de Grève surges an anxious crowd, in uncertainty and suspense. At 12:30 torches are seen turning the corner of the Rue de la Vannerie, escorting a delegate of the Convention, clad in the insignia of office, who unfolds a paper and reads by the ruddy light the decree of the Convention, the outlawry of the members of the insurgent Commune, of the members of the Council General who are its abettors, and of all such citizens as shall listen to its appeal. Outlawry, death without trial, the mere thought pales the cheek of the most determined. Gamelin feels the icy sweat on his brow. He watches the crowd hurrying with all speed from the place. Turning his head, he finds that the hall, packed but now with councillors, is almost empty. But they have fled in vain. Their signatures attest their attendance. It is 2 a.m. The Incorruptible is in the neighbouring hall, in deliberation with the Commune and the proscribed representatives. Gamelin casts a despairing look over the dark square below. By the light of the lanterns he can see the wooden candles above the grocer's shop knocking together like ninepins. The street lamps shiver and swing. A high wind has sprung up. Next moment a deluge of rain comes down. The place empties entirely. such as the fear of the Convention and its dread decree had not put to flight, scatter in terror of a wetting. Ariens' guns are abandoned, and when the lightning reveals the troops of the Convention debouching simultaneously from the Rue Antoine and from the Quai, the approaches to the Hôtel de Ville are utterly deserted. At last Maximilien has resolved to make appeal from the decree of the Convention to his own section, the Section de Pique. The Council General sends for swords, pistols, muskets. But now the clash of arms, the trampling of feet, and the shiver of broken glass fill the building. The troops of the Convention sweep by like an avalanche across the hall of deliberation, and pour into the council chamber. A shot rings out. Gamelin sees Robespierre fall. His jaw is broken. He himself grasps his knife, the 6-sou knife that, one day of bitter scarcity, had cut bread for a starving mother, the same knife that, one summer evening at a farm at Orangy, Élodie had held in her lap when she cried the forfeits. He opens it, tries to plunge it into his heart, but the blade strikes on a rib, closes on the handle, the catch giving way, and 2 fingers are badly cut. Gamelin falls, the blood pouring from the wounds. He lies quite still, but the cold is cruel, and he is trampled underfoot in the turmoil of a fearful struggle. Through the hurly-burly he can distinctly hear the voice of the young dragoon Henry, shouting, "The tyrant is no more, his myrmidons are broken, the revolution will resume its course, majestic and terrible." Gamelin fainted. At 7 in the morning a surgeon sent by the Convention dressed his hurts. The Convention was full of solicitude for Robespierre's accomplices. It would fain not have one of them escape the guillotine. The artist, ex-juror, ex-member of the Council General of the Commune, was borne on a litter to the Conciergerie. End of chapter 27.
Chapter 28 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim McDougall. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 28. On the 10th, when Évariste, after a fevered night passed on the pallet bed of a dungeon, awoke with a start of indescribable horror, Paris was smiling in the sunshine in all her beauty and immensity. New-born hope filled the prisoners' hearts. Tradesmen were blithely opening their shops. Citizens felt themselves richer, young men happier, women more beautiful, for the fall of Robespierre. Only a handful of Jacobins, a few constitutional priests, and a few old women trembled to see the government pass into the hands of the evil-minded and corrupt. Delegates from the Revolutionary Tribunal, the public prosecutor and 2 judges, were on their way to the convention to congratulate it on having put an end to the plots. By decree of the Assembly, the scaffold was again to be set up in the Place de la Révolution. They wanted the wealthy, the fashionable, the pretty women to see, without putting themselves about, the execution of Robespierre, which was to take place that same day. The dictator and his accomplices were outlawed. It only needed their identity to be verified by 2 municipal officers for the tribunal to hand them over immediately to the executioner. But a difficulty arose. The verifications could not be made in legal form, the Commune as a body having been put outside the pale of law. The Assembly authorized identification by ordinary witnesses. The triumvirs were haled to death, with their chief accomplices, and midst shouts of joy and fury, imprecations, laughter, and dances. The next day, Évariste, who had recovered some strength and could almost stand on his legs, was taken from his cell, brought before the tribunal, and placed on the platform where so many victims, illustrious or obscure, had sat in succession. Now it groaned under the weight of 70 individuals, the majority members of the Commune, some jurors like Gamelin, outlawed like him. Again he saw the jury bench, the seat where he had been accustomed to loll, the place where he had terrorized unhappy prisoners, where he had affronted the scornful eyes of Jacques Maubel and Maurice Brateau, the appealing glances of the citoyenne Rochemaure, who had got him his post as juryman and whom he had recompensed with a sentence of death. Again he saw, looking down on the dais where the judges sat in 3 mahogany armchairs, covered in red Utrecht velvet, the busts of Chalier and Marat, and that bust of Brutus, which he had one day apostrophized. Nothing was altered, neither the axes, the fasces, the red caps of liberty on the wallpaper, nor the insults shouted by the tricoteuses in the galleries to those about to die, nor yet the soul of Fouquier-Tinville, hard-headed, painstaking, zealously turning over his murderous papers, and, in his character of perfect magistrate, sending his friends of yesterday to the scaffold. The citoyen Remacle, tailor and doorkeeper, and Dupont Senior, joiner, of the Place de Thionville, member of the Committee of Surveillance of the Section du Pont Neuf, identified Gamelin Évariste, painter, ex-juror of the Revolutionary Tribunal, ex-member of the Council General of the Commune. For their services they received an assignat of 100 sous from the funds of the section, but, having been neighbors and friends of the outlaw, they found it embarrassing to meet his eye. Anyhow, it was a hot day. They were thirsty and in a hurry to be off and drink a glass of wine. Gamelin found difficulty in mounting the tumbril. He had lost a great deal of blood, and his wounds pained him cruelly. The driver whipped up his jade, and the procession got under way amid a storm of hooting. Some women recognized Gamelin and yelled, "Go your ways, drinker of blood, murderer at 18 francs a day. He doesn't laugh now. Look how pale he is, the coward." They were the same women who used in other days to insult conspirators and aristocrats, extremists and moderates, all the victims sent by Gamelin and his colleagues to the guillotine. The cart turned into the Quai des Morfondus, made slowly for the Pont Neuf and the Rue de la Monnaie. Its destination was the Place de la Révolution and Robespierre's scaffold. The horse was lame. Every other minute the driver's whip whistled about its ears. The crowd of spectators, a merry, excited crowd, delayed the progress of the escort, fraternizing with a gendarme, who pulled in their horses to a walk. At the corner of the Rue Honoré, the insults were redoubled. Parties of young men, at table in the fashionable restaurateurs' rooms on the mezzanine floor, ran to the windows, napkin in hand, and howled, "Cannibals, man-eaters, vampires." The cart having plunged into a heap of refuse that had not been removed during the 2 days of civil disorder, the gilded youth screamed with delight, "The wagon's mired! Hurrah! The Jacobins in the jakes!" Gamelin was thinking, and truth seemed to dawn on him. "I die justly," he reflected. "It is just we should receive these outrages cast at the Republic, for we should have safeguarded her against them. We have been weak. We have been guilty of supineness. We have betrayed the Republic. We have earned our fate. Robespierre himself, the Immaculate, the Saint, has sinned from mildness, mercifulness. His faults are wiped out by his martyrdom. Here is my exemplar, and I too have betrayed the Republic. The Republic perishes. It is just and fair that I die with her. I have been oversparing of blood. Let my blood flow. Let me perish. I have deserved." Such were his reflections, when suddenly he caught sight of the signboard of the Amour Peintre, and a torrent of bittersweet emotion swept tumultuously over his heart. The shop was shut. The sun blinds of the 3 windows on the mezzanine floor were drawn right down. As the cart passed in front of the window of the blue chamber, a woman's hand, wearing a silver ring on the ring finger, pushed aside the edge of the blind, and threw toward Gamelin a red carnation which his bound hands prevented him from catching, but which he adored as the token and likeness of those red and fragrant lips that had refreshed his mouth. His eyes filled with bursting tears, and his whole being was still entranced with the glamour of this farewell when he saw the blood-stained knife rise into view in the Place de la Révolution. End of chapter 28.
Chapter 29 of The Gods Are Athirst. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Gods Are Athirst by Anatole France. Translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson. Chapter 29. It was Nivose. Masses of floating ice encumbered the Seine. The basins in the Tuileries garden, the kennels, the public fountains were frozen. The north wind swept clouds of hoar-frost before it in the streets. A white steam breathed from the horses' noses, and the city folk would glance in passing at the thermometer at the opticians' doors. A shop-boy was wiping the fog from the window-panes of the Amour peintre, while curious passers-by threw a look at the prince in vogue. Robespierre squeezing into a cup a heart like a pumpkin to drink the blood, and ambitious allegorical designs with such titles as the Tigography of Robespierre. It was all hydras, serpents, horrid monsters let loose on France by the tyrant. Other pictures represented the horrible conspiracy of Robespierre, Robespierre's arrest, the death of Robespierre. That day, after the midday dinner, Philippe Desmahis walked into the Amour peintre, his portfolio under his arm, and brought the citoyen Jean Blaise a plate he had just finished, a stippled engraving of the suicide of Robespierre. The artist's picaresque burin had made Robespierre as hideous as possible. The French people were not yet satiated with all the memorials which enshrined the horror and opprobrium felt for the man who was made scapegoat of all the crimes of the Revolution. For all that, the print-seller, who knew his public, informed Desmahis that henceforth he was going to give him military subjects to engrave. "We shall all be wanting victories and conquests, swords, waving plumes, triumphant generals. Glory is to be the word. I feel it in me. My heart beats high to hear the exploits of our valiant armies. And when I have a feeling, it is seldom all the world doesn't have the same feeling at the same time. What we want is warriors and women, Mars and Venus. Citoyen Blaise, I have still 2 or 3 drawings of Gamelin's by me, which you gave me to engrave. Is it urgent? Not a bit. By the by, about Gamelin. Yesterday, strolling in the Boulevard du Temple, I saw at a dealer's, who keeps a second-hand stall opposite the house of Beaumarchais, all that poor devil's canvases, among the rest his Oreste and Electra. The head of Oreste, who is like Gamelin, is really fine, I assure you. The head and arm are superb. The man told me he found no difficulty in getting rid of these canvases to artists who want to paint over them. Poor Gamelin! He might have been a genius of the first order, perhaps, if he hadn't taken to politics." "He had the soul of a criminal," replied the citoyen Blaise. "I unmasked him on this very spot, when his sanguinary instincts were still held in check. He never forgave me. Oh, he was a choice blackguard." "Poor fellow, he was sincere enough. It was the fanatics that were his ruin." "You don't defend him, I presume, Desmahis?" "There's no defending him." "No, citoyen Blaise, there's no defending him." The citoyen Blaise tapped the gallant Desmahis' shoulder amicably, and observed, "Times are changed. We can call you Barbaroux, now the Convention is recalling the proscribed. Now I think of it, Desmahis, engrave me a portrait of Charlotte Corday, will you?" A woman, a tall, handsome brunette, enveloped in furs, entered the shop and bestowed on the citoyen Blaise a little discreet nod that implied intimacy. It was Julie Gamelin, but she no longer bore that dishonoured name. She preferred to be called the citoyenne widow Châtaigne, and wore under her mantle a red tunic in honour of the red shirts of the Terror. Julie had at first felt a certain repulsion towards Évariste's mistress. Anything that had come near her brother was odious to her. But the citoyenne Blaise, after Évariste's death, had found an asylum for the unhappy mother in the attics of the Amour peintre. Julie had also taken refuge there. Then she had got employment again at the fashionable milliner's in the Rue des Lombards. Her short hair à la victime, her aristocratic looks, her mourning weeds had won the sympathies of the gilded youth. Jean Blaise, who Rose Thévenin had pretty well thrown over, offered her his homage, which she accepted. Still, Julie was fond of wearing men's clothes, as in the old tragic days. She had a fine muscadin costume made for her, and often went, huge baton and all complete, to sup at some tavern at Sèvres or Meudon, with a girl friend, a little assistant in a fashion shop. Inconsolable for the loss of the young noble whose name she bore, this masculine-minded Julie found the only solace to her melancholy in a savage rancour. Every time she encountered Jacobins, she would set the passers-by on them, crying, "Death! Death!" She had small leisure left to give to her mother, who alone in her room told her beads all day, too deeply shocked at her boy's tragic death to feel the grief that might have been expected. Rose was now the constant companion of Élodie, who certainly got on amicably with her stepmothers. "Where is Élodie?" asked the citoyenne Chassagne. Jean Blaise shook his head. He did not know. He never did know. He made it a point of honour not to. Julie had come to take her friend with her to see Rose Thévenin at Monceau, where the actress lived in a little house with an English garden. At the conciergerie, Rose Thévenin had made the acquaintance of a big army contractor, the citoyen Montfort. She had been released first by Jean Blaise's intervention, and had then procured the citoyen Montfort's pardon, who was no sooner at liberty than he started his old trade of provisioning the troops, to which he added speculation in building lots in the Pépinière quarter. The architects Ledoux, Olivier, and Wailly were erecting pretty houses in that district, and in 3 months the land had trebled in value. Montfort, since their imprisonment together in the Luxembourg, had been Rose Thévenin's lover. He now gave her a little house in the neighbourhood of Tivoli and the Rue de Rocher, which was very expensive, and cost him nothing, the sale of the adjacent properties having already repaid him several times over. Jean Blaise was a man of the world, so he deemed it best to put up with what he could not hinder. He gave up Mademoiselle Thévenin to Montfort, without ceasing to be on friendly terms with her. Julie had not been long at the Amour peintre before Élodie came down to her in the shop, looking like a fashion plate. Under her mantle, despite the rigours of the season, she wore nothing but her white frock. Her face was even paler than of old, and her figure thinner. Her looks were languishing, and her whole person breathed voluptuous invitation. The 2 women set off for Rose Thévenin's, who was expecting them. Desmahis accompanied them. The actress was consulting him about the decoration of her new house, and he was in love with Élodie, who had by this time half made up her mind to let him sigh no more in vain. When the party came near Monceau, where the victims of the Place de la Révolution lay buried under a layer of lime, "It is all very well in the cold weather," remarked Julie, "but in the spring the exhalations from the ground there will poison half the town." Rose Thévenin received her 2 friends in a drawing-room furnished à l'antique, the sofas and armchairs of which were designed by David. Roman bas-reliefs, copied in monochrome, adorned the walls above statues, busts, and candelabra of imitation bronze. She wore a curled wig of a straw colour. At that date wigs were all the rage. It was quite common to include half a dozen and a half in a bride's trousseau. A gown of La Cyprienne moulded her body like a sheath. Throwing a cloak over her shoulders, she led her 2 friends and the engraver into the garden, which Ledoux was laying out for her, but which as yet was a chaos of leafless trees and plaster. She showed them, however, Fingal's grotto, a Gothic chapel with a bell, a temple, a torrent. "There," she said, pointing to a clump of firs, "I should like to raise a cenotaph to the memory of the unfortunate Brotteaux des Ilettes. I was not indifferent to him. He was a lovable man. The monsters slaughtered him. I bewailed his fate. Desmahis, you shall design me an urn on a column." Then she added, almost without a pause, "It is heartbreaking. I wanted to give a ball this week, but all the fiddles are engaged 3 weeks in advance. There is dancing every night at the Citoyenne Tallien's." After dinner, Mademoiselle Thévenin's carriage took the 3 friends and Emilie to the Théâtre Feydeau. All that was most elegant in Paris was gathered in the house: the women with hair dressed à l'antique or à la victime, in very low dresses, purple or white and spangled with gold, the men wearing very tall black collars, and the chin disappearing in enormous white cravats. The bill announced Phèdre and the chien du jardinier, the gardener's dog. With one voice the audience demanded the hymn dear to the Muscadins and the gilded youth, the Réveil du peuple, the awakening of the people. The curtain rose, and a little man, short and fat, took the stage. It was the celebrated Lais. He sang in his fine tenor voice, "Peuple français, peuple de frères." Such storms of applause broke out as set the lustres of the chandelier jingling. Then some murmurs made themselves heard, and the voice of the citizen in a round hat answered from the pit with the hymn of the Marseillaise. "Allons enfin à la patrie." The voice was drowned by howls, and shouts were raised. "Down with the terrorists! Death to the Jacobins!" Lais was recalled, and sang a second time over the hymn of the Thermidorians, "Peuple français, peuple de frères." In every playhouse was to be seen the bust of Marat, surmounting a column or raised on a pedestal. At the Théâtre Feydeau this bust stood on a dwarf pillar on the prompt side, against the masonry framing in the stage. While the orchestra was playing the overture of Phèdre et Hippolyte, a young Muscadin, pointing his cane at the bust, shouted, "Down with Marat!" The whole house took up the cry, "Down with Marat! Down with Marat!" Urgent voices rose above the uproar. "It is a black shame that bust should still be there. The infamous Marat lords it everywhere, to our dishonour. His busts are as many as the heads he wanted to cut off. Venomous toad! Tiger! Vile serpent!" Suddenly an elegantly dressed spectator clambers onto the edge of his box, pushes the bust, oversets it. The plaster head falls in shivers on the musicians' heads, amid the cheers of the audience, who spring to their feet and strike up the Réveil du peuple, "Peuple français, peuple de frères." Among the most enthusiastic singers, Élodie recognized the handsome dragoon, the little lawyer's clerk, Henry, her first love. After the performance the gallant Desmahis called a cabriolet and escorted the citoyenne Blaise back to the Amour peintre. In the carriage the artist took Élodie's hand between his. "You know, Élodie, I love you." "I know it because you love all women." "I love them in you." She smiled. "I should be assuming a heavy task, spite of the wigs black, blonde, and red that are the rage, if I undertook to be all women, all sorts of women, for you." "Élodie, I swear—" "What? Oh, citoyenne Desmahis, either you have a deal of simplicity, or you credit me with overmuch." Desmahis had not a word to say, and she hugged herself over the triumph of having reduced her witty admirer to silence. In the corner of the Rue de la Loi they heard singing and shouting, and saw shadows flitting round a brazier of live coals. It was a band of young bloods, who had just come out of the Théâtre Français, and were burning a guy representing the friend of the people. In the Rue Honoré the coachman struck his cocked hat against a burlesque effigy of Marat swinging from the cord of a street lantern. The fellow, heartened by the incident, turned round to his fares and told them how, only last night, the tripe seller in the Rue Montorgueil had smeared blood over Marat's head, declaring, "That's the stuff he liked," and how some little scamps of 10 had thrown the bust into the sewer, and how the spectators had hit the nail on the head, shouting, "That's the Panthéon for him." Meanwhile, from every eating-house and restaurateur's voices could be heard singing, "Peuple français, peuple de frères." "Good-bye," said Élodie, jumping out of the cabriolet. But Desmahis begged so hard, He was so tenderly urgent and spoke so sweetly that she had not the heart to leave him at the door. "It is late," she said. "You must only stay an instant." In the blue chamber she threw off her mantle, and appeared in her white gown à l'antique, which displayed all the white fulness of her shape. "You are cold, perhaps," she said. "I will light the fire, if it is already laid." She struck the flint and put a lighted match to the fire. Philippe took her in his arms with the gentleness that bespeaks strength, and she felt a strange, delicious thrill. She was already yielding beneath his kisses when she snatched herself from his arms, crying, "Let me be." Slowly she uncoiled her hair before the chimney-glass. Then she looked mournfully at the ring she wore on the ring-finger of her left hand, a little silver ring on which the face of Marat, all worn and battered, could no longer be made out. She looked at it till the tears confused her sight, took it off softly, and tossed it into the flames. Then, her face shining with tears and smiles, transfigured with tenderness and passion, she threw herself into Philippe's arms. The night was far advanced when the citoyenne Blaise opened the outer door of the flat for her lover, and whispered to him in the darkness, "Good-bye, sweetheart. It is the hour my father will be coming home. If you hear a noise on the stairs, go up quick to the higher floor, and don't come down till all danger is over of your being seen. To have the street door opened, give 3 raps on the concierge's window. Good-bye, my love. Good-bye, my soul." The last dying embers were glowing on the hearth when Élodie, tired and happy, dropped her head on the pillow. End of Chapter 29. End of The Gods Are Athirst, by Anatole France, translated by Mrs. Wilfrid Jackson.